Should Nintendo make Link a girl? After the reveal of Zelda Wii U at E3 last summer, people lost their collective minds over what appeared to be a feminized Link. Twitter exploded with excitement. Even Zelda Wii U series producer Eiji Aonuma fueled the fire by calling the female Link rumors interesting. But then Nintendo stepped in and cut our collective fun short. They said Link, definitely a dude. Yet even an official denial from Nintendo HQ didn't stop reporters from repeatedly asking Aonuma about the possibility. He responded with the same stock answer. Nintendo designs Link as a stand-in for the player, so his gender should be irrelevant. But isn't that kind of a contradiction? Sure, Link's gender may not be central, but he's by no means genderless. After seeing the buzz generated by even the mere suggestion of a female Link, well, it got us here at Game Show thinking. In a world with parallel universes and reincarnated characters, why couldn't Link be a girl? First, let's start by distinguishing between two different types of characters. On the one hand, there are single characters, like Mario or Luke Skywalker, and on the other are honorific characters, like Korra and Aang in the Avatar series. Mario is always the same Mario. He looks the same in each game, has the same personality, and is always rescuing the same princess. But the Zelda series is different. As iconic as Link's green tunic is, there's a different iteration of him in every game. Link is less the name of a specific person and more like a title. According to the Zelda Wikia, Link is simply the name given to the human chosen by the goddess to become the reincarnation of the Triforce of Courage. Naturally. So the possibility of Link being a girl actually fits perfectly with Zelda lore. In fact, Link is purposefully never characterized as overtly manly or masculine. I mean, many of his best cosplayers are women.
You know what I like about you, Link? Your delicate touch.
Excuse me, princess.
Moreover, the origin stories in the Zeldaverse are all about the ladies. 3 golden goddesses created both the entire universe and the Triforce pieces. In ancient times, they entrusted the protection of the Triforce to the goddess Hylia, who later chose to become reborn as the mortal Zelda. In fact, anytime masculine characters appear in these origin stories, they're villains trying to destroy the world, like Demise, the Demon King, or later the incarnation of his hatred known as Ganon. Now, to be 100% crystal clear, I am not saying that these characters are evil because they're male, only that if we're talking about gender in the Zeldaverse, femininity is usually associated with the virtuous and the good. Even most of Link's sidekicks are female. Navi, Fi, Midna, Epona, we're already most of the way there in terms of making Link a girl. Even his most obviously male helper, Sheik, turns out to be Zelda in disguise. And remember how that reveal moment with Sheik blew your mind? Well, what I'm proposing could do that in a very similar way. It fundamentally changed the way you thought about Zelda and what she was capable of, and I think our hero of time deserves a moment like that too. Because let's be real here, it's 2015. Moments like female Thor and Black Spider-Man show us how the fictional universes we know and love can benefit from a new kind of perspective. According to media scholar Henry Jenkins, our popular media is moving away from a focus on continuity and instead gravitating towards multiplicity. Jenkins says that multiplicity allows fans to explore alternate perspectives or retellings of their favorite stories. It's the reason we're able to enjoy a variety of different versions of the characters we love the most. Multiplicity is like a fresh pair of eyes, giving us the ability to revisit a beloved fictional world and grapple with its core principles, but from a different angle, so we can fall in love with it all over again. Right now, you might be asking yourself, why hasn't Nintendo ever even considered a female Link? Well, after Onuma was approached about it for the zillionth time last summer, he said that if having playable female characters in Hyrule Warriors made more girls play the game, he'd consider a female Link. As it stands though, Nintendo won't risk alienating their massive male audience. But would a female Link actually alienate them? Or is Nintendo just going off an outdated idea of how players relate to video game protagonists? Judging by the critical popularity of leading ladies like FemShep and Lara Croft, it seems like male players have no problem playing female characters as long as they're the leading ladies in a good game. Also, according to a new study by researchers Rosalind Wiseman and Ashley Birch, girls care way more about seeing their gender represented than boys do, but the gender of the character also didn't really matter to the vast majority of boys polled. So would a female Link make more girls play Zelda? Probably. And would most male players care about playing as a girl? Probably not. And though Zelda remains an incredible franchise, it needs a change. Even the creators think so. Series producer Eiji Aonuma said that he wished that they'd had more time to rethink the typical Zelda formula before the release of Skyward Sword. But while he meant changing gameplay and dungeon structure, I think we need to do more than that. I think it's time we had a female Link to turn our outdated perspective of Hyrule on its head. So what do you think? Does the Zelda franchise need a shot in the arm in the form of a female Link, or should we just stay the course? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about why violence is such a fundamental part of games. Let's see what you had to say. Real quick before we get into the rest of the comments, one thing that I noticed was that when we were talking about violence, a lot of people chose, I would say, obvious examples. So Resident Evil or Call of Duty, examples where you have a person with a gun shooting another person. And I was talking about violence in a broader, maybe more abstract context, in the sense that you take something that is in existence and then you take it out of existence. So Mario jumping on a Goomba, for example, or in Tetris, eliminating rows of blocks. So when we think about violence in that way, it becomes this much broader sort of commentary on what it means to play games. Anyway, hope that helps. Butterworthy, who has the best YouTube handle ever. Just to be clear, does it mean that you're worthy of receiving butter or your worth is measured in butter? I don't know. We'll talk about this afterwards. Regardless, Butterworthy does not believe that we live in a world in which a game like Journey, which is explicitly non-violent, can sell, millions and millions of copies. To which I would say, well, maybe not right now, but I think we can move towards that world. If you look at other mediums, like television, for example, on a network like CBS, you have shows like CSI, which are incredibly violent, and on the other hand, you have a show like Big Bang Theory, which is not very violent at all. Both of those shows are incredibly watched by millions of people, and I believe that games can reflect that same spectrum. Matt Johnston doesn't believe that all the accolades that were bestowed upon Journey are proof that we're hungry for non-violent experiences, and wants more examples. Well, there's Proteus and Gone Home, some of the games I mentioned in my best of 2015 list, the games I'm looking forward to, but one of the most obvious examples is The Sims, which is the best-selling PC game of all time. If that isn't proof that people want non-violent experiences, then I don't really know what is. Bioshyn makes an excellent point on the historical side, simply that non-violent games have existed throughout the life of the medium. So you have a game like Myst or The Curse of Monkey Island, for example. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that if you look at the early history of games, so if you look at a book like Replay by Tristan Donovan, which narrates this process it narrates this history really, really well, there was a wide variety of different experiences that were being made in the late 70s, early 80s. The problem was distribution. It was very hard to get these sort of unorthodox experiences out to a wider public. And I think after sort of like the consolidation of what games were as a genre in the 90s with games like Doom, I think only now are we starting to revisit some of these earlier kind of experiments in what games ostensibly could be. But yes, it's an excellent point that there have been these examples throughout time that have been nonviolent. So thanks for pointing that out. Sunny Kalsi says that the reason that violence has persisted as a mechanic in games is because it makes the design of games very linear, and it also gives players a very clear method of interaction with non-player characters in the world, which is something that Ken Levine had mentioned that I had quoted in the episode, specifically that shooters give players very clear objectives. You have a gun, and then there are other people, and you need to shoot them with said gun. And communicating objectives to players is incredibly important for game designers. That said, and I mentioned this in the first-person shooters episode, is that first-person shooters and violent games are just a single method of interaction. If you think about a reticule that you use in a gun as being a place where you can interact with objects in a virtual space, there's lots of different ways that you could interact with said thing. You could shoot at them, but you could also take a photo of them, or you could shoot paint of them, which is happening in Nintendo's upcoming game Splatoon. So there's lots of different ways that we can think about what our interactions are in terms of whether it's going to be violent interactions or something else. Not to mention, there's a whole range of cooperative games that don't involve eliminating people at all. So yeah, but that's a really good point.